everybody, and welcome back to painting a Ruby Dragon here on Miniature Monthly. Thanks for joining us again. Today we're going to continue our paint job here on the Ruby Dragon. If you missed part 1, you might want to go back and check that out. So first of all, let's take a look at our palette here and the colors we have set up, because we have quite a few colors here, and I'll try to list them all out for you. Of course, we have our white and our black. Here we have the colors we'll be using on the chest of the dragon, the yellows and everything. A little yellow oxide by Chimera. We have raw sienna and transparent yellow oxide from Golden Heavy Body Acrylics. A little bit of Van Dyke brown also from Golden, and I have some sulfuric yellow, that's from P3. Another P3 paint we're using here is the Sanguine base. It's a nice dark purpley crimson. This one here is by Holbein. It's called Imidazolone Brown. A bit of a mouthful, but a really nice, rich, reddish brown. Another great paint here, which I love, is Alizarin Crimson. Have a little bit of the cadmium red hue. Some Pyroli red, which is maybe the brightest red that I could find. Although this one here, the Red by Chimera, is really a choice red, very amazing red color, has great coverage. So we're going to see if we can't use a little bit of that. I put a few inks on my palette here. This is kind of the range of red inks from De La Roni. That's my favorite ink brand. A little crimson ink, some fiery red ink, and the scarlet red ink. And you can see it's going from cold to medium to warm. So this one's kind of the orangish one, medium red, colder red. And then we have our metallics here that we're going to be using. I have a little bit of these golden metallics, sort of a lighter gold and a more of a yellowish gold. Those are both from Golden Heavy Body Acrylics. And then we have some powdered metallics here from Pearl X Pigments. A little bit of our rose gold, super copper, and color shifting magenta to green pigment. And I think I will also just add a little bit of this interference red pigment, which I forgot to put on there. And we're going to use that to add some highlights here at the beginning. So should have had that on there, but there we go. And that stuff, it looks like a kind of a whitish powder, and that's why we'll use it for our highlights, because it's kind of like adding white to our highlights, but from some angles it will shine out looking really reddish, pinkish red, so it will add that extra dimension of interest to our painting. And that's what we want. We want to have something that's not typical. We want to have something that's really interesting here, that has a lot of volume, but also is working in those metallic paints, maybe some color shifting, because we want his scales to look like they, are metallic-y, tough scales. And then, yeah, so now that we have all those listed off, let's maybe get started. We can start with maybe some of those highlights. We already have the basis of our paint job here, but I just want to add a bit more volume through adding some highlights, just to get it started off with here. So to get these powders to stick, we'll be using a little bit of this gloss medium to mix that and get them to stick. You could also mix it in with a little bit of paint instead, which you might end up doing. Now you might wonder, it's going to look really pale with the powder, this white, but we'll make it a little bit less pale by adding on some transparent reds on top of that, and that's kind of the general process which we'll be using. So let's just get it started off here with the interference red. And I think I will mix a little bit of white paint in. And that's going to help us with coverage. Right, maybe like along this guy's arm here. We can use the side of a brush, kind of dab it in there, adding those highlights in. Increasing that volume and giving us a nice sort of effect. It should look fairly pale and white, and that's okay. We'll add some transparent paint on top to give it more vibrant color. I'm applying these highlights in sort of a dabbing motion, but there's also some sculpted texture, so we can also skim the brush along the top in some areas to pick out that texture. Just anywhere it looks like we need to have some highlights, let's put them in there. Because of how we've applied things in the previous layer, we should be able to see maybe where the lighting should be showing through, and we can use that as aid to making our choices with this. We have our general vision in now, and we want to kind of start to add maybe a little extra details and also accentuate the volumes, which is really important. All while giving that impression of these scales and using the metallic pigments. And when using these powders, you have to be careful. If you get any on your hands or something like that, they can get all over the place before you know it. So just be careful. I like to add them to the palette using a little palette knife. You can use an X-Acto knife or whatever to add them to the palette. I want to kind of give the impression of that light coming in and striking these surfaces in a particular way. So these parts here that I'm painting right now are very angular, and we're going to only be painting the top face that's facing towards the light with these highlights. I'm just kind of adding a bit more of those, helping us read the shapes a bit more by adding these highlights in there. Yeah, I think we need a bit more in here. Yep. Maybe on bicep. Go. And it's fun to start picking out details and things like that. This. And by doing this dabbing motion, we're adding the information, these little scales here. I mean, this little scale is sculpted on there, but if we can increase that impression by adding some scales of our own with our little dabbing motion. Don't feel like you have to only paint what's sculpted. This is a great way for you to add your own vision, your own mark to the figure. You're not just painting what's there. And there's a lot of other interference tones. There's greens and purples and that sort of thing. So for other projects, you might try to use those for your instead of white for your highlights. Yep. There you go. Now, anytime you're highlighting, you want to make sure to be sparing enough with your highlights. We wouldn't want to continue to add highlights down overhanging areas because the light wouldn't get down in there. We'll use our shadows to define the volumes in those areas. These should hopefully look like little sparkles of light shining off these beautiful scales. So where the light's hitting strongest, the sparkles might join together. And as it gets away from the light, they'll break apart into their own individual little sparkles. Sounds like some dogs outside are getting very excited. If you can hear that in the audio. That's what that was. Okay. And maybe just a few more spots. Some of these up here. All right. And we're going to leave that and let it dry for a little bit. I think we can maybe work on his belly now. Now, I thought it'd be kind of cool to have it go from a golden metallics into the yellow of the belly. And we really can start in either part. I think maybe we'll start with the non-metallic paints. Maybe with our brightest color here. Our sulfuric yellow. Might mix a little bit with the raw sienna with that. It's maybe a little bit yellower than I want. I think this is like perfect here. Let's get maybe some of that paint in there. Yeah. I think I want it a bit more pale than that, so let's add a little bit of white. There we go. And again, I'm adding this kind of a dappling motion, dabbing sort of motion. Give the impression of scales. Once again, just to reiterate, we want those little scales, those little dots to join together where the greatest highlights are. And then as we move away from that, they will turn into their own individual dots. So not just the belly, but maybe the inside of the arms here could have a little bit of that yellow too. You'll have to see that with animals. Of course, we don't want to work it too much into the armpit area because that's where the deepest shadows on anything is going to be, is up in the armpits. We can leave those dark, almost black. Sometimes people shy away from having those really dark areas, but it actually reduces our contrast, and it also looks a little bit less realistic. It's actually quite realistic to have a very deep shadow underneath the arm, and also in the crotch area usually. And this figure has quite a few areas which are overhanging very dramatically to the light, and there should be some very deep shadows in there. Yeah. Yeah, just getting down in there into the inside of the leg as well. Maybe has a little bit of this yellow instead. And we're gonna maybe some of these overhang areas. It's giving the impression of this pale yellowish belly. It'd be hard to have something be red everywhere. So this is a good way to, have that other color in there. And also, animals tend to have these paler bellies, maybe like a lighter colored belly. It's not only common on animals, it's almost the norm, the rule. And there's a reason for that. So if we can have our fantasy races or dragons or monsters and things follow some of those rules that real life animals do, it adds that impression of reality, that realism to them. And I like my monsters and creatures to feel real because it gives this sense of I don't know, like they could just come to life at any point. So I like to kind of imagine that, and while I'm working, it brings me a lot of pleasure. So now I'll come in with my gold paints, and we are going to add some gold kind of around the horizon line between the red and the yellow, the belly. Yeah. Let's take that paler yellow and do, or this pale gold and do a few more. I do feel like that belly, just in a few spots, needs to be a bit even more pale than that. So let's get a little bit of white. Mix in with our color here. Maybe use a little of the Chimera. That stuff has great coverage. We can pick out some of these high points. Then I'm going to take some of my transparent yellow iron oxide, and we will mix that with a little bit of the Van Dyke brown to darken it. It should be fairly transparent. And we can add a bit of shading in here. We can maybe blend it a bit with the 2-brush. And here in the deep shadows, it's really okay if this overlaps with our red, because it's very transparent, and it will just it'll read as a bit of darkening and desaturating that red, which is good because it's in the deep shadow. It should be darker and less saturated to indicate our shadow. I even come in with the pure Van Dyke brown and hit the deep areas, the really dark shadows down in there. I might just take that Van Dyke brown and maybe pick out some of these shadows that to help me read the surfaces a bit better. I'm using this Van Dyke brown instead of a dark red or a dark or a black or something like that. We're going to be adding some transparent red on top of all of this, so this brown will kind of combine through translucency. It will just kind of desaturate the layer on top. I use some, in this deep area here, for example. Giving that dark shadow, which we like so much. Yeah, it really gives that impression that shadow's being cast there. Just saw this bit in here. Let's get this paint in here. It will help us see what's going on. Now I think I want to add in some bit more of these metallic tones we have. We have the rose gold and the super copper. Particularly in the back and the tail area, I think that we could add some interesting things going on here. Maybe a series of stripes, some markings. And this way we're not just painting the volumes, we're adding this impression of life, this being a real animal, a real creature. And how do we know how these, creatures might look? We can study real animals, real reptiles. And draw inspiration from real life, from your own observations, from nature programs. And that way, our art can enrich our lives and our understanding of the world and our own appreciation for the world around us. So I like to base a lot of my ideas off of the things I see and the things I observe in real life. So when you're painting your own dragon, you might base it off of something completely different than what I'm doing. But if you learn that one lesson, you'll be able to come up with your own interesting take on it. I'm also using a bit of this rose gold too, along the transition between the yellow and the red. Maybe some of that striping pattern we've been doing. All right. I think maybe the next thing we'll do is I want to glaze in some some transparent red to tint this the interference, the white parts that we put in there. But I think maybe we need a bit more definition, sort of in the mid-tone area and where it's transitioning. So I'm going to just go for it and use a bit of the cadmium red hue. Now you might hear that name, cadmium red, and kind of recoil because you hear cadmium and you know that that's a toxic pigment. So you got to be careful if you were to use toxic paint. I don't recommend using anything toxic in your painting unless there's a good reason for it. But the good news is that this is cadmium red hue. Now, anytime you hear the word hue attached to the end of paint, it means it's a synthetic version of the paint. So what that means is that this paint actually has no cadmium in it. It's just the hue of cadmium red. And it should look the same as any cadmium red, but it's non-toxic. And it's also a bit cheaper as well than the what we might call a heritage pigment like cadmium. Same thing's true for things like cobalt blue or Indian yellow. And in this day and age, there's really no reason to be using toxic paint. The only time I use any sort of toxic materials is if I want to, is with my airbrush. And then I use proper protective gear. It's just solvent-based stuff through the airbrush can really give you amazing effects. But that's a lesson for another day. I'm just using this cadmium red to pick out some of these little creases and lines. Picking out some of those details or adding some of my own that aren't even sculpted on there. I'm avoiding the areas that I've painted my highlights in, because this is kind of our mid-tone to shadow color, kind of my mid-tone color. Doesn't need to be blended. In a sense, our little dabbing motions are concentrating more dots together versus less dots. That's a way of blending. Doesn't need to be smooth. You know, if you look around yourself, like I was saying, basing things off of real life rather than, you know, a set of expectations, you might notice that life's not smooth, you know. There's a lot of things, textures, bumpy surfaces. If you have everything smoothly blended, you actually have a less realistic paint job that has less contrast. So, you want to save those smooth blends for where they're appropriate. searching for anywhere I could add this. Maybe it needs a little bit more definition, some creases or things like that. Need to be defined. Now all these thick scales, I want those, I'm going to have those look like they're actually gems. So we're going to save that for later. Maybe in another episode. Maybe. Probably in the next part. We'll see how far the painting progresses, but eventually we will be painting all these gem structures. And we can talk about how to paint these faceted gems. Should be pretty fun. For now, we're still on these interesting scales, so I hope you're having a good time seeing how these are painted. How you might paint your own colored metallic scales. One of your fantastical creatures. Maybe we'll move on soon, but I think I want to put a little bit of this up in the face area. Yeah, let's get a little bit of this paint up in there. Maybe up in the face area we might switch to the Chimera Red. It's super bright, so we'll see how that looks. Yeah. Yeah, it's really good coverage too, so. I'm just kind of painting that down into the crevices between some of these scales. To say, love this paint, this red from Chimera. Very cool stuff. Really, all those paints from Chimera, the Chimera colors. It's just a few, really, because they're designed to be able to mix just any color you want from them. They have great coverage, consistency, heavy pigment load. Also, really bright colors, especially for the coverage you're getting. Really like them. Can be a little tricky getting pots of them here in the States, but follow them on Facebook or on social media. They usually let you know when new batches are available. They only do small batches at this point, but they're really worth keeping an eye on and picking them up. Really nice stuff. Alright. We're just kind of separating out these little scale patterns. But this Chimera Red, I think it's doing a great job, so stick with that Chimera Red, I think, instead of the Cadmium Red even. It's working even better. But using a combination of them or another red kind of serves the same purpose. We're looking for a sort of an opaque color that's going to cover well. Yeah. There we go. No? Thank you. I think you probably guessed it's time to do some transparent layers. And we will be using some of the more transparent colors we have. Of course, we have our inks, which are going to be naturally transparent. We could mix that in with any of our paints, or maybe use them by themselves. But the Alizarin Crimson is also very transparent, and I think I'm going to start there and concentrate it along the back here. One moment, just gotta wash my brush out here a little bit more with those chimeras. So you gotta make sure you get your brush really well washed out. And don't be afraid to really pinch your brush and wring it out when you're painting. You're not going to hurt your brush by doing that. Sometimes people think brushes are really fragile and delicate, especially especially people worry about it with the more high quality brushes. Sometimes our desire to be careful with these brushes can lead to them being damaged. So it's good to really take your brush and wring it out like that. And then repoint it. You're not going to hurt the brush doing that. Yeah, and see how I love that color changing and shifting. That's what we're looking for. Yeah, it's going to look nice. And we're going to really give it that extra oomph with our transparent colors here, starting with the crimson. So we'll take our alizarin crimson and we can be two brushing this as well. So the two brush technique, you can just put a lot of paint on there and blend it out. You should be able to see all those details that we painted in there showing through our layer of paint and being tinted by that transparent color. Give it that can give us that volume that we're looking for. Yeah. This is another good general point, is that we can be unblended, really stark with our details, and then apply a transparent blend on top. So it's a nice combination of the blended and the unblended to give the impression of texture, but also some smoothness of volume. And I think I'm only going to use this crimson along his spine. We'll switch to warmer reds for the rest of the body. And I might use, maybe mix a little bit of this midazoline brown in with my crimson. It's kind of more brownish tone. And we'll have maybe some sanguine base. Yeah. This is kind of a more desaturated version, and we'll use that around the feet, maybe. Yeah. And by using less saturated colors around the feet and things like that, we kind of are using a contrast of saturation to maybe distract the eye from these areas that are less important. Still definitely red, but by mixing that brown in, we're desaturating it. Alright, now let's take some of our inks here, and I'm going to start with the crimson ink, which is a bit brighter than my alizarin crimson, as you can see, quite a bit brighter. So we can use that to begin to transition into our brighter reds as we move out from the spine. Because this ink is just so transparent, we're going to be getting all of that information that we have on the model already, showing through a tint of the ink. We can, of course, blend that as well using the two-brush method, Or if you want to go through and use another blending method like careful glazing, you can do that too. And to learn to do these different blending methods, we have video tutorials up on other parts of Miniature Monthly, both from me and from Aaron and Elizabeth. You get lots of different perspectives. We have different insights, and I think by watching those videos and of course practicing the techniques, you have to practice them before you can pick them up. Hopefully you'll be able to learn the variety of blending techniques. It'll make this all a lot easier for you. It's one of the great things about Miniature Monthly, in my opinion, is that, well, you get a lot of different perspectives on the art, and that can be really valuable rather than just getting one person's views on things. And I hope you find that valuable. I know you do, because I met a lot of you patrons out there, and that's why one of the things I always hear that I find really valuable is the insights of other different painters on the same topics. Something really maybe unique out there amongst the patrons. Something that we can be proud of too as teachers. Speaking of meeting all of you, that was really great to see some of you out at the Las Vegas Open this last month. Had a really great time there, teaching various classes and getting to meet you. My next convention I'll be at is Adepticon. Most of my classes, I think all my classes are sold out at this point, but if there's a class that you really want to get into, you can always show up day of. I'll be bringing some extra models, and if we can squeeze a seat in, I'll get you into that class. So yeah, don't feel bad about or embarrassed about doing that. We kind of encourage it, and Adepticon does as well. So we're not breaking any rules or depriving anybody of anything. It's good for us too. We can make a little extra money. So I always am of the mind that if I can squeeze another person in to class, I'm going to do that, so that they can so that the most people as possible can learn these techniques, learn to be better painters, and not only better painters, but learn to find more enjoyment in your painting. That's more important even. Sometimes people get too obsessed with being better and better and better and better, but it can really sometimes take the fun out of it, you know. So learning to really enjoy your painting more is almost more valuable, because if you enjoy painting, you're going to come back, you're going to keep painting and trying new things, and in the end, that's what's going to make you better, is continuing to practice, continuing to try things. If you don't enjoy it, eventually you're going to do something else. So that could be a tough lesson to learn. So I try to reinforce that with my students. So often we place ourselves under such pressure to get better and be better, or to already be as good as somebody else. It's easy to look at somebody who's really talented and either feel that you can never do that or that they have some sort of special talent, some sort of natural talent or something, but what you don't see is all that time that they spent and struggles that they had getting to where they're at right now. So just try to remind yourself of that when you find yourself putting yourself under pressure or feeling like you can't do something. Because I guarantee you, any great artist has gone through all of the steps that you're going through right now. Best thing you can do is what you're doing right now, is having a good teacher and trying and listening and taking on new things. You're never going to get there without practice and without taking risks and allowing yourself to fail from now and then. A lot of times you learn more from your failures than you do from your successes. As the flame red ink, I'm going to really make this face area kind of a brightest, purest red. Alright, I think the scales are really coming together. They're just about where I want them. I think that kind of brings us to the end of this part of our Ruby Dragon painting video. In the next one we're going to be working on these chunkier scales and some of these faceted gems, and that's going to be really fun. I hope you come back and join us for that. Until next time, I hope you have some fun painting your own miniatures. Go ahead and share those with us online. We always love to see what you're painting and ask me questions or just say hi online. I always enjoy that. Maybe I'll see you at Adepticon. or somewhere else out there on the road. Until then, you all have a good time and paint bravely.